of these bullets is like us, travelling forwards through time. The other one's going backwards. Can you tell which is which? How about now?
Hi everybody, I'm Dom Griffin, I'm a film critic, and you're watching the Armchair Auteur. It's an ongoing video series where I talk about movies, do reviews, look at screenplays, that sort of thing. If you're a big movie person and you like watching people talk about and dissect film, please consider subscribing. Today we are going to be reviewing Tenet, the new Christopher Nolan movie. This is going to be a spoiler-free review, which will be very difficult for me to do, but I'm going to try to do it so that more people can engage with it without having necessarily seen it, given the controversy surrounding its release. But first, I do want to apologize for some of the delay since the last video that I posted. I had to scrap a review because it took too long to get around to actually recording, to the point that it was no longer really relevant. So the printed review that I wrote is going to be linked directly in the description below if you want to check it out. I'm sorry that it didn't actually make it to the channel, but it's been kind of a hectic couple of weeks for me with the movie theater industry slowly reopening and stuff. We're going to talk about Tenet. I won't spoil the movie for anybody who hasn't seen it, but I am going to talk about the movie. So if you are one of those people that doesn't want any aspect of the movie discussed with you, then maybe skip it. But otherwise, I'm not going to ruin the experience for anybody or talk about specific plot points and things. But the first thing I'm going to talk about with Tenet is my journey with watching the movie from this past week, and sort of some of the controversy around the movie being released at all, right? So basically, I technically have seen Tenet 3 times already, but it's complicated. This past Tuesday night, a very good friend of mine was gracious enough to let me join him on a trip to see the movie in Virginia at the Alamo Drafthouse drive-in screening of the movie they did. It was one of the early advanced screenings of the movie. I thought seeing it at a drive-in would be pretty safe, and I thought that it would be a kind of cool way to see the movie. 2 things sort of hampered our enjoyment of the movie at that screening. One is that it started raining. Not hard enough to cancel the screening, but hard enough to where you would sort of have to watch the movie through windshield wiper blades occasionally. And also because of the way drive-ins work, and the audio is disseminated through an FM transmitter, his car had some radio issues, so we kind of lost audio for the second half of the movie. And if you've ever watched a Christopher Nolan movie or know anything about Tenet at all, you can tell that you miss a lot from the movie without hearing what people are saying, since most of what people are saying is explaining what's actually going on. Fun time, good hang, but not the best movie-going experience. Then Wednesday, the next night, I had a little bit of time to myself, and because I was so sort of obsessed with just finishing the movie experience and fully understanding what happened, I committed a cardinal sin, and I watched the Korean cam rip of the movie, the bootleg. And whatever, ethics aside, I do want to say that rip that's going around, if you're a person who doesn't want to go to the movie theaters, is pretty legible and pretty coherent audio-wise, and you do get the gist of the movie if you're interested. It should be said, by this point, I am not into the movie that much. I am not necessarily in the bag for the entire concept. But I like it enough that I want to give it another chance before I actually review the channel, so last night I watched it for real. I run a movie theater and we have the movie, so I watched it with a couple of colleagues, vastly socially distanced apart from one another in a largely empty auditorium. Sort of the dream way to watch a movie that most people don't have access to. We'll get to the actual review of the movie here in a minute, but I do want to say, I think a lot of critics are being really odd in their critique of the ability to see Tenet safely, because in most cases, even though they're talking about how it's unsafe for moviegoers at large to go see the film, I feel like a lot of them are only complaining about them not being able to secretly, fairly see it beforehand. So in a lot of these cases, I think if critics were given easy access to safe press screenings where they were social distance with 10 people, I think a lot of them wouldn't be critiquing the movie's release strategy quite as much, because they'd get to see it safely, and it doesn't really matter if audiences do. So I do think there's a little bit of hypocrisy among some of my film critic brethren with their complaints about the movie. But that said, I'm kind of torn on the whole thing, because I work in the movie theater industry. I sort of need for movie theaters to reopen so I can have money. But I also fully acknowledge that movie theaters are not the safest place to be during COVID. And if you're someone who actually really, is really concerned about that, you have a lot of comorbidities and stuff, it's just not worth going back to the movies. For any movie, not specifically Tenet or whatever. It's just if you have any sort of hang-ups, just feel safe continuing to not actually watch movies in a theater or watch stuff on Netflix. It's fine. All that out of the way, though, now we can actually talk about the movie. And the thing I need to say about Tenet is that I'm a diehard Christopher Nolan fan. I bought a VHS copy of Memento maybe a month after it hit video when I was like still in high school. Like I've been a fan of the man's movies for a very long time. But me personally, I've been kind of like diminishing returns lately. I don't think about Christopher Nolan in as excited a way as I once did. So for me, going into Tenet, I had relatively low expectations to begin with. I didn't like Dunkirk very much. Like I get it, but I'm just not a fan. Interstellar has some issues. Like I don't really care about The Dark Knight Rises. So like I'm kind of at a period now where I'm like distant from Nolan. I don't consider him to be like this like impeccable genius anymore. You know, but the idea of him doing another big budget, original sci-fi concept action thriller did tickle me. It's the kind of thing I do want to check out. So like, you know, I went in with low expectations, but with hopeful expectations. Like I wanted it to be good. I didn't want it to be like a dud or whatever. And I must say, there's a very specific moment pretty early on in Tenet, without giving the plot away or anything, that changed my expectations of the movie very dramatically. And that moment is very early on in the film, and it's something you see in the trailer, and it's where there's a blonde scientist character explaining to the protagonist, the main character played by Jonathan David Washington, where she's explaining to him the general concept, like the central conceit of what makes the whole movie work. And when that scene actually happens in the movie, it's stupid. It's just it's a stupid scene, and I thought it was just dumb as hell. And when I realized that the entire movie was going to be based around this kernel of an idea, I felt really free. I felt free because I didn't have to worry about understanding the logic of the movie or any of that type of stuff. I just knew that the central idea to me was dumb as fuck, and that I could enjoy the movie around it and not have to worry about like getting it. So many reviews that you see of this movie are 90% focused on like whether or not the logic of the narrative holds up, whether or not the central concept works, and whether or not like it's easy for people to understand, whether or not it's complicated. And all Christopher Nolan movies sort of teach you how to watch them as you're watching them. That's like a big thing. Like when you watch Memento, within a few scenes, it makes sense. Like the structure of the movie makes sense, and you should get where it's going. The same could be said for everything he's ever made. Nolan's a pretty clear-eyed storyteller. No matter how complex or like, you know, wire-tight his plots are, they make sense. Like I get that people think they're complicated and hard to understand, but literally no Nolan movie has ever like confused me. Like the minute you start watching it, you kind of get it. With Tenet, the actual central thing is a bit too complicated to actually clearly delineate to anybody. And if you try really hard to understand it that way, you're just not going to have a good time. Just straight up. Like it's just not, it doesn't work in that way. And I think that is a failing. I think it's fair to criticize it. But once you accept that, the whole movie is like way more fun to enjoy because you accept that this is just like a dumb fictional concept. You know what I mean? Like everyone who's looking at the movie like Christopher Nolan is a genius who comes up with the most brilliant original ideas is going to be frustrated or flustered convincing themselves that it's great. But all the smart people who can just kind of look at it and go, oh, this is dumb as shit, but like, you know, it's a convoluted mess, but like, I get it, it's fine. The key to understanding the movie's central concept is that it is just like an alternate take on an actually very well-worn sci-fi trope. You've actually seen the basics of this sort of storytelling mechanics in tons of movies before, so it's not that original. It's just that Nolan's take on it is more hard sci-fi, kind of more like inscrutable, like on purpose. So like, it doesn't bother me so much. Like, to be honest, if you actually have to compare the way Tenet functions to other similar science fiction movies that play in similar time travel-esque logic, something like, say, Avengers Endgame or some of the Stephen Moffat penned Doctor Who episodes, if you compare it to those things, Tenet actually is like completely fine. It's just if you look at it like it's going to be some groundbreaking new concept, you might be left wanting. But outside of that core concept that I kind of have to talk around to be spoiler-free, the only other major criticisms I have of Tenet as a movie is that the actual villain, played by Kenneth Branagh, without getting into too many details, like, sucks. Like, he doesn't make a lot of sense as a character. His motivations are kind of shitty. And also, it's just Kenneth Branagh doing a Russian accent. And Kenneth Branagh should never be Russian or a villain in a movie ever again, because every time he does it, it's very, very bad. So, like, that entire chunk of stuff is, like, not very good. And the movie sort of hints at some, like, environmentalist themes about, like, different generations and what we're doing to the planet and stuff like that. I don't think those things quite congeal together. So, like, those things, coupled with, like, the weirdness of the actual central concept, kind of stops Tenet from being, in my opinion, one of his better movies, right? Like, so, those things I don't like. I hated them when I first started watching the movie, and then by this third viewing, like, I stopped caring about them and actually sort of learned to enjoy it around them. And part of why I realized I didn't care about them as much is because of a realization I came to about the movie very late last night that I'll talk about later in the video, about why I think the movie is special and is really cool, and why I'm still not sure if it really is special or cool, or if I'm just trying to convince myself it is. But we can talk much more plainly about the things that I think are really cool about the movie. The thing is, all the other stuff we talked about aside, all the hard sci-fi concepts aside, this is essentially like a really expensive James Bond pastiche, right? Like, it is beat for beat, if you took it from like a screenwriting course perspective and laid it against any other James Bond movie or Mission Impossible movie or just any spy thriller ever made, Tenet, like, beat for beat is the same movie. Like, it has all the same stuff. There's like a cool protagonist who is like going on sort of like a long-term fetch quest in exotic locales, doing cool things, beating the shit out of people. There's like throbbing music. I mean, if you didn't know this is like a James Bond movie, it literally has like a big pop star doing like a theme song for it. Like, Travis Scott released a song called The Plan, and like even the cover to the single art makes it feel like a Bond song, okay? Like, you know, like a postmodern Bond song kind of. So like the whole thing is Nolan doing like a Bond-esque dealy, right? It turns out that's really tight. Like, him spending this much money and doing all these sort of practical effects and doing like this big in-scope thing works really well. Like, Nolan's aesthetic, the way he tells stories, how he constructs things, how he sees the world, is obviously very heavily informed by his love of James Bond movies, but it's pushed through his sort of weird, sort of emotionally detached, cold filter, and then what comes at the other end is a really cool approach to doing a big budget sci-fi movie. Do I personally think it's as impressive as some of the later Mission Impossible films? No. It's better than a lot of Bond movies, not all of them necessarily, but like, it's fun watching this guy who is in a position where Warner Brothers will give him money to do whatever the fuck he wants. It's fun watching him do like sort of a straightforward genre romp, you know what I mean? Because that's kind of what Tenet is. It's a straightforward movie about a spy going on missions and stuff. The mysterious tenor of those missions and what's actually at stake and like what the mechanics are that fuel the narrative, all that stuff is like window dressing, because at a baseline it's like a dude beating up people or in an expensive suit and then like asking people questions and mysterious shit happening, and like, who doesn't love that? This existing is a really cool thing. It gives us like a peek into that alternate world where he makes James Bond movies, but kind of better because he's not actually constrained by the confines of what is and is not a James Bond movie. He doesn't have to adhere to those aesthetic principles. He can kind of create his own aesthetic. And the aesthetic he's created here is pretty dope. And a big part of why it kind of works is because of a few key people, okay? There's like 4 key people that make this movie like really special. John David Washington as the protagonist is a bit of a cipher as a character. He's not like fleshed out enough to be like, you know, a really well-developed protagonist the way other characters in Nolan movies are. But John David Washington is like pretty charming on his own. He has like a good amount of charisma, and he's a very physical actor. Like, he does a lot of the action stuff in this movie in a way that's very believable and very watchable and very engaging. And you just like him. You just like watching him do stuff. Like, he's not the most well drawn, sure. He doesn't have as much to do on an emotional complexity level, but he's entertaining. And Robert Pattinson as his like sort of, we'll explain. I can't really explain their relationship. They work together in the movie. Is also really incredible. Like, these two guys are just such like magnetic modern day movie star types, and they just get how you're supposed to function within this kind of genre story, and they do it so well that it keeps at bay a lot of other minor criticisms you might have about the construction of the movie. Because in a scene-to-scene basis, you're just watching 2 cool guys do cool shit, and like, what else is there? Like, if you're watching a big blockbuster movie, like, that's all we really need, right? Like, dudes rock. The other 2 people are not on screen. The other 2 people that make this movie so special are on the back end. And one of them is editor Jennifer Lame, who has primarily edited like a lot of Noah Baumbach's most recent movies. And this is her first time, I think, editing like a big budget project like this. And she brings so much to the Nolan world. Like, his action scenes have never been more legible. They've never been more clear and understandable. Even though the dialogue can be kind of hard to hear in certain scenes and all that type of stuff people are either complaining about in other reviews. On like a very basic film construction level, scene to scene, you can tell what is happening, in my opinion, better than you can in most other Nolan action scenes. The entire third act has like this kind of big cross-cutting sequence that I think is a little bit like unwieldy, and that I think it's a little bit longer than it needs to be and shows a little bit more than it needs to show. But like at a very basic level, I found that the image-to-image juxtaposition is very strong, and it's much better than it has been in like any other Nolan movie. Like, the only other Nolan movie I can think of that's like this well edited is like Memento. I think he and Dodie Dorn should have worked together like longer than they really did. And then like The Prestige is like the one Lee Smith edited movie that I think is like really, really, really strongly edited. Stoked that Jennifer Lame came in to edit this movie because Lee Smith was busy, and I sort of hope she just sticks around. I think her editing style is a much better marriage with the way that Nolan tries to make movies. And the other person that we got to give a huge, huge thumbs up to is Ludwig Göransson, the guy who works with Don Glover on all the Josh Gambino stuff. He won an Oscar for the Black Panther score. He did the score for like, The Mandalorian and stuff. I think Ludwig is developing into a really exciting composer for big, studio fare. Obviously, Nolan brought him in to ask him to like ape and cover the way Hans Zimmer wouldn't have normally scored this movie. But what he does with the music in this movie, as loud and percussive and like onslaught as it is in an auditorium, it's really good. There's all these really cool little like swaggery flourishes to it that I don't think Hans Zimmer could have done that give it that alternate world Bond vibe that I think is really good. Like, yeah, it's loud, there's all the like crashing synths and stuff like that, but like there's something to it that's really, it's like kind of hard to put your finger on, but it makes it seem so much cooler. And like I just really hope that these two stick with him. I think that these two are the two most exciting things to happen to Christopher Nolan's movies since like Hoyt von Hoytema started like shooting them when they were stellar. I think that like this sort of new behind the scenes crew is like what he should stick with going forward. So from what I've said so far, it really sounds like my take on Tenet is that it's a stupid movie that doesn't actually make sense, but I think it's really cool and fun, so I don't care, right? Like that seems like that's my take. And like right when I hit the credits on this third viewing of the movie, that was my take. I was kind of like, yeah, I mean, this movie rocks. It's really fun. I have no problem continuing to see it again if I can somehow. And I think other people should get to see it. And I hope that the home video window for this movie is small. I hope that it can become more accessible to people who don't want to risk their health to see it, because I think it's a real fun movie. But it didn't seem like more than a real fun movie to me. Like, I still had these nagging feelings about the overall construction and the idea of the central concept and all this stuff. Like, again, without spoilers, ultimately Christopher Nolan basically made, like, a James Bond movie that he, like, shoved through Michel Gondry's video for Chibo Mato's Sugar Water. Like, it's just that, but with James Bond stuff and, like, a little bit of, like, peppering from other time travel stories, and, like, that's cool, but it doesn't seem as, like, robust and, like, deeply moving, I think, as some of his best movies are, But when I sidestepped the stuff I didn't like about it, and I ignored the issues I had with the villain, and I sort of, like, sidestepped the issues I had with some of the explanations for things and some of the poor exposition, I'm left with the idea of what Tenet is. And what it is, at its core, within the movie, is a large network of spies working together to save the world long term, right? And the thing about most spy movies is they're based around, like, the CIA or, like, MI6, and there's all these uncomfortable ideas about colonialism and, like, what spies actually do in the real world. Like, as cool and fun as it is to watch a James Bond movie, he's, like, an imperialist tool, and, like, even Mission Impossible, I think, sidesteps that by, like, making Tom Cruise seem kind of like a superhero. Like, spy movies are kind of wrought with, political complexity, whether they're in the movie or not, because you know how spies work on Earth in reality. The concept for Tenet allows to be able to tell a story about spy work that isn't bogged down by the realities of what spies do and what the human detritus of their work is, and, like, the sacrifice and stuff. At the core of Tenet is just this idea, I think, and I hope I'm not just, like, gaslighting myself here, but it's this idea of a network of people who all have to trust one another to do their part to make a better world. Like, they have to have a sort of faith, not in the general concept, not in, like, all this sci-fi shit, but in each other. And that's the thing that kind of got me in the movie. And I hope I'm not just, like, making it up, but there are moments in this movie between John David Washington's character and Robert Pattinson's character where their camaraderie and their kind of casual explanations of what are really going on speak to me about being a part of something larger than yourself and doing work that is good for others thanklessly because it's the right thing to do. It's not about predetermination or fate. It's about doing the work and helping one another and trusting one another to do their little part in a larger scheme. And how all these people working together in this larger scheme are able to actually make something good happen. Even if, like, no one cares, or even if it seems thankless, or even if it seems, like, wrong, like, they're doing something really powerful there. And, like, I don't know if that's really what Nolan's trying to say in this movie, or if I'm just depressed about reality, and that's what I got out of it. But I was really grateful to get that out of it. So, I mean, hey, maybe I'm lying to myself. Maybe I'm over-reading into some of the subtext and stuff. And if you've seen the movie, maybe you can let me know if you agree. And if you haven't, when you do see it, you might be able to. But to me, I think that it's the closest in the last few movies Nolan has come to having something, to me, that felt genuinely hopeful and kind of beautiful. But on a real level, I did get a lot of enjoyment from the movie. I've been having a really shitty week, and I've been really stressed and, like, uncomfortable and, like, just losing my mind. And it did feel good to lose myself a little bit into this big movie. And not as many movies this year have really done that for me, and I really am grateful to have that feeling. And it's just a bummer that people aren't going to be able to have that feeling unless they, like, go to a physical theater and risk getting coughed on by strangers. And that sucks. That's my take on Tenet. I know it's kind of a weird one, and it's a lot to talk about without trying to ruin the movie for people, but I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't get shamed into going to see this movie in theaters. Nothing wrong with a Korean camera every now and again. Thank you guys for watching. If you like this, give it a thumbs up. If you have not subscribed, please consider subscribing. And please, if you have thoughts about Tenet, let me know in the comments. I want to talk to more people about this movie who have seen it if they have. Hope you guys are staying safe. I hope you guys are all right. Have a good day.